Koko was born on a Tuesday that refused to end. The sun set at its usual time, dipping below the hills of Abeokuta with the lazy confidence it always had. But then, for no reason anyone could explain, it rose again. Not the next morning, the same evening. It climbed back up into the sky, like a man who forgot something in the room he just left, hung there for 2 extra hours, and then set again, this time for good. The elders argued about it for weeks. The imam said it was a sign. The pastor said it was a test. Old Mama Chidima, who was 103 years old and had no teeth left but had seen things that would turn your hair white before you were 12, said it was neither. She sat on her wooden stool outside her doorway, chewing nothing, and said simply, "Something has come that does not belong to this world or the next. It belongs to the space between." Koko was born in that second sunset. His mother, Adaisi, was 19 years old and had been in labor since morning. When his head finally emerged, the midwife, a practical woman named Funke, who had delivered 341 babies and prided herself on never screaming, schemed. Not because anything was wrong with the baby, because the baby opened his eyes before his body was fully out and looked directly at her with the calm certainty of a man who had been somewhere before and had not particularly enjoyed it. He did not cry. Every baby cries. Koko did not. He lay there on the mat, covered in the evidence of his arrival, and looked at the ceiling as if he was reading something written there that no one else could see. Funke wrapped him quickly. Adaisi held him and whispered his name, a name she had chosen before he was born, pulled from a dream she'd had in her 4th month, where a very small, very serious man sat across from her at a table and said, "Call me Koko. I won't answer to anything else." His father, Emeka, held him for 30 seconds, then put him down carefully, the way you put down something that you suspect might explode, and went outside to sit under the mango tree until morning. The curse was not discovered immediately. Curses rarely announce themselves. They settle in quietly, unpack their things, make themselves comfortable. It took 3 months for anyone to notice that objects near Koko behaved strangely. Not dangerously, not in the way you would see in the stories people told to frighten children, strangely in the way that makes you question the basic agreement that reality operates on. A cup placed to his left would, over the course of an hour, slide slowly to his right. Not quickly, not dramatically, just gradually, the way a bored man edges toward the door at a party. Shadows in his room fell in the wrong direction. Not always, just often enough that it was impossible to ignore. And the most unsettling thing, the thing that truly disturbed Emeka and made Adaisi include extra prayer she had never needed before, was that Koko appeared to be having full, animated conversations with things no one else could see. Not with himself, with something. He would turn his head, listen, respond with gurgling sounds that had the clear rhythm of reply. He would laugh at the right moments. He would look concerned. He would, on one terrifying occasion when he was 4 months old and could not possibly have learned the word, say very clearly, "No." The Babalawo Emeka consulted in secret, taking a long bus to Ibadan so no one in the neighborhood would see him and report back to the pastor, was a man named Babatunde, who smelled of palm oil and something older and sat in a room so full of things hanging from the ceiling that you had to duck constantly just to move through it. Babatunde threw his shells 16 times. He picked them up and threw them again. He did not speak for 20 minutes. Then he looked at Emeka with the expression of a man who has just read a letter containing news he would have preferred never to receive and said, "Your son was seen." Emeka waited. Before he was born. There is a place, you do not need to know its name, it would not help you to know it, a place of arrangement. Your son passed through it on his way here. He was not supposed to stop. He stopped. Something there saw him, and in the way of things that see something they want to keep, it took a piece of him and left something in exchange. What did it leave? Emeka asked. Babatunde looked at the shells for a long moment, then said, The ability to see what is real, he said. All of it. Not just the part we agreed to call real. All of it. Emeka drove home 3 hours in a downfall that smelled of sweat and spent the whole journey trying to decide whether this was a gift or a punishment, and arrived home no closer to an answer. Koko grew. This is what children do, regardless of circumstances, curses, the opinions of Babalawo, or the concerns of parents who take long bus rides to avoid being seen. He grew, and he walked at 9 months, which was too early, and he spoke his first full sentence at 11 months. The small one is lying, directed to no one visible and in reference to nothing anyone could identify. He walked around the house in the peculiar way of children who are paying attention to a version of events that adults have long since been unable to access. He was otherwise a perfectly ordinary child. This is the thing that confused everyone. He liked jollof rice and hated when it was too spicy. He was afraid of the sound of motorcycles. He cried when he was hungry and laughed too loud at things that were only slightly funny, and had very strong opinions about which pair of sandals he wanted to wear on any given day. The strangeness of him was not constant. It was intermittent, like a radio signal from somewhere far away, mostly static, but occasionally, in conditions no one could predict, crystal clear. When Koko was 6, the world did its first truly impossible thing in front of him, and he was the only one who was not surprised. He was walking home from school with his friend Dotun, a cheerful, round-faced boy who was always eating something, when the road in front of them bent. Not a turn, a bend, like a piece of paper folded in half. One moment the road went straight ahead toward the roundabout where the woman sold agbalumo. The next moment it curved sharply upward at an angle that roads are not supposed to be able to curve, and at the top of the curve, briefly, for just a few seconds, there was something that looked like a door. Not a door attached to anything, a freestanding door made of what looked like dark wood, with no frame and no wall, standing in the middle of the air above the bent road. And through the door, which was slightly open, there was not the other side of the road, but something else entirely, a grey light, and in the grey light, shapes moving. Koko stopped walking. Dotun, who had been in the middle of eating a piece of coconut candy, kept walking, directly through the space where the bent road and the floating door were, without any interruption, and turned around and said, "Koko, why are you not moving?" "Do you not see that?" Koko said. "See what?" Koko looked at the door. The door looked back at him. The shapes in the grey light behind it paused in their moving, as if they had noticed him noticing them. Then the road straightened. The door was gone. The agbalumo seller was where she had always been. "Nothing," Koko said, and ate the coconut candy Dotun offered him, and went home and did not say anything to his parents, because he was 6 and already understood instinctively that there are things you do not say to parents if you want them to be able to sleep. The world bent more frequently after that, not always roads, sometimes time. He would be sitting in class and the teacher would be in the middle of saying something about arithmetic, and there would be a skip, like a scratch on a record, and the teacher would be saying something different mid-sentence, and everyone else would still be following perfectly, but Koko would have missed the part in between, the part that had happened in the gap, the part that no one else noticed was missing. He started keeping a notebook. He wrote down the gaps, he wrote down what was there before and what was there after, and tried to figure out what had been removed from in between and why. By the time he was 8, the notebook had 4 volumes. He was a quiet child in the way that children who are paying very close attention to things are quiet, not withdrawn, not unhappy. He had friends. He was good at football in an unexpected way, not fast, not particularly skilled, but he had an uncanny ability to know where the ball was going to be slightly before it arrived there, which his coach thought was talent and which was actually just a consequence of seeing slightly more reality than everyone else. He argued with his mother about homework and competed intensely with his cousin for the best seat in front of the television on Saturday mornings, and had a period of several months at age 9 where he refused to eat any food that was not a specific shade of orange for reasons he could not fully explain, but which seemed important. He was, in other words, a child with a hole in him where a piece of his soul had been borrowed without permission before he was born, a child whose reality bled at the edges, but a child. The thing that changed everything happened on the night of his 10th birthday.
Adeze had made a small celebration, cake from the baker 2 streets over. The aunties came. His cousin Precious ate most of the small chops before anyone else could get to them, and this led to a conflict that was talked about for weeks afterwards. The lights were on, the music was on. It was the uncomplicated happiness of a family that knows how to be happy together when it is required. And then the music stopped. Not because anyone turned it off, not because the power went out. The music stopped in the middle of a note, like the music stops in the middle of a note when something cuts a sound like you cut a thread, and everyone in the room went still. Not frozen, they were still conscious, still breathing, still themselves, but they could not move. Their faces held the expressions they were wearing. Auntie with her mouth open mid-laugh, Precious with a piece of puff-puff suspended halfway to her mouth, Emeka with his hand raised in a gesture of emphasis in the middle of a point he would never finish making. Koko could move. He stood in the middle of the frozen room and looked at it for a long moment. The arrested celebration, the unfinished gestures, the story of a family paused like a film by someone who needed to say something. And then he turned because he felt it necessary to turn, and there was a man sitting in the chair in the corner. The chair that had been empty, the chair that he was sat in had been empty a moment ago.
The man was thin and very tall, even sitting down, and was wearing a suit that seemed to be made of something that was not quite fabric. It shifted slightly when you looked directly at it, like a heat haze or like the air above a fire. His face was, and this was the thing Koko would try hardest to describe later and fail most completely, familiar. Not in the sense of having seen it before, in the deeper sense, the sense in which you sometimes recognize a landscape you have never visited. The face said, "You already know me. You have always known me." "Koko," the man said. "You took part of me," Koko said. He did not know how he knew this. He had always known it, in the way you know things that live in your body rather than your mind. The man inclined his head. "I saw you passing through. You were remarkable. I wanted to remember you." "That is not how remembering works." "It is how I remember," the man said. He had the quality of someone who has been slightly amused by everything for longer than the concept of time has existed. "Give it back," Koko said. The man looked at him for a very long moment. The frozen party held its frozen postures. The puff-puff remained suspended. "There would be a cost," the man said. "There is always a cost," Koko said. "Everything has a cost. The cost of having it taken was paid by me for 10 years without consent. Whatever you want to charge me to return it cannot be more than what was already taken." The man was quiet. And then he smiled. A real smile, not a performance of one. The kind that surprises the face it's on as much as the face watching it. "Children these days," he said, "they argue. Tell me the cost." "You will see it all, fully, not just the flickers, not just the gaps and the bends you have been getting glimpses of. All of it, the complete thing, everything underneath reality and everything above it, and everything running alongside it that you have been catching the edges of your whole life. You will see the full machinery of the world, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And the weight of seeing it," he paused, "carrying it will not be easy." Koko was 10 years old. He stood in the middle of his own frozen birthday party, in his good trousers that his mother had ironed with the particular care she reserved for special occasions. And he thought about it seriously, in the way that 10-year-olds who have grown up watching the seams of reality come loose think about serious things. Does my family get hurt if I say yes? No. Does my family get hurt if I say no? No. Do I get the peace back either way? Yes, the man said. That part was mine to give, whether you accepted the bargain or not. I told you there was a cost, to give you the option to refuse and go back to the limited version. Some people prefer the limited version. It is more comfortable. Koko considered this. You came here on my birthday to do this. I came when you were ready, the man said. You have been ready for some time. Tonight was the occasion. Yes, Koko said. I want to see it. The man stood. He was even taller standing. He reached into the pocket of his shifting suit and took out something that looked like water held in the shape of a sphere without anything containing it, just a ball of water hanging in the air above his palm, and he held it out, and Koko looked at it, and in it he could see, briefly, in a flash, in the way you sometimes glimpse the structure of something immense, a darkness with light in it, and in the light movement, and in the movement pattern, and in the pattern something that felt at the very edge of comprehension like a name. "Your peace," the man said. Koko held out his hand. The water sphere touched his palm and dissolved into him like rain into dry soil, and the world opened. It is difficult to describe what Koko experienced in the 3 seconds that followed, because language was built for the agreed-upon reality, the one everyone uses, and Koko was experiencing the whole thing, all of it, at once, and language only has room for one room at a time. What he would say later when he tried to explain it to people who asked was that it was like having your eyes open your whole life, but with your hands pressed against them, and then removing your hands and finding that what you had thought was darkness was actually just your own palms, and that the world behind them was so full of light and movement and structure and life operating on levels you had not even had words for, that the only reasonable response was to sit down. He sat down. The man was gone. The music restarted, mid-note, exactly where it had stopped. The puff-puff completed its journey to Precious's mouth. Emeka finished his point. The aunties laughed. The celebration continued, uninterrupted, as if nothing had paused at all. Koko sat on the floor in the middle of it and looked at the world. He saw the thin, silver threads that ran between people, not metaphorical ones, not the threads of relationship and feeling that poets write about, but actual threads, actual fine silver connections running from person to person in the room and extending out through the walls, connecting everyone in this house to everyone they had ever been close to, living and dead. A web so intricate and extensive that if you looked at it from very far away, it would look like light itself. He saw the layer of the world that existed just underneath the visible one. Not a spirit world, not a separate dimension, not something dramatic with drama's need for darkness and menace. Just another floor of the same building, occupied by things going about their own business with the same mild industry as the people on the floor above, occasionally glancing up through the ceiling with curiosity, and occasionally reaching through it without malice. He saw time doing what he had always suspected it did, not moving in one direction, but occupying all its directions simultaneously. The past still fully happening somewhere to the left of now, the future already having happened somewhere to the right, the present moment merely the point where a particular perspective was standing. He saw his mother, and he saw all the love in her, which was an actual visible thing, not a warm feeling, but a genuine structural force, woven through her like ironwork, connecting her to him and to his father and to her own mother now dead and to her not yet born second child she did not yet know she was carrying. A lattice of love that made her, physically made her in the same way bones make a body. And the beauty of it was so much that Koko began to cry without meaning to, sitting on the floor of his own birthday party. Adiaze looked down. "Koko, why are you on the floor? Did you fall? Are you hurt?" "I am not hurt," Koko said. He looked up at her, at the love lattice, at the silver thread running from her chest to his. "Mama, you are so beautiful." She blinked. She looked at her sister across the room. Her sister shrugged. Adiaze crouched down and touched his face and said, "Thank you, my strange boy," and helped him up. The years that followed were exactly what the man in the shifting suit had warned him they would be. Not easy. Not in the way that an extra cent attached to no instruction manual and no community of others who share it is never easy. Not in the way that seeing the full machinery of the world means seeing the broken parts of it too. The places where the silver threads had been cut. The places where the love lattice had worn thin. The places where things on the other floor of the building were in distress, in ways that translated as wrongness in the visible world, like a damp stain spreading from a leak above. He saw the grief of the city he lived in, which was enormous and old and layered, and not the grief of individual people, but the grief of a place that had been many things and remembered all of them. He saw the conversations people had with themselves that they did not know they were having, the arguments between their visible selves and the other selves that lived just a few degrees to the right of them, selves made of all the choices they had not made and all the paths they had not walked. He saw the market from above and below and sideways simultaneously, which was overwhelming enough that he had to stop going to the market for a period of several months until he learned to narrow his focus. He learned to narrow his focus. This is the thing no one tells you about gifts. The second gift is always the gift of learning to manage the first one. It takes longer than the first gift. It is less dramatic. It does not happen in a single suspended moment at a birthday party with a mysterious man in a shifting suit. It happens in the daily, frustrating, incremental work of a child, and then a teenager, and then a young man finding the walls of himself and deciding which windows to open and which ones to keep closed until he was ready for them. He was 12 when he first understood that he could help people, and specifically that he could help people whose silver threads had been cut in ways they did not know they were cut, and that were making them sick, with a sickness that no doctor could diagnose, because the cut was not in their visible body, but in the layer underneath. He did not know what to call it. He did not have a word for it. He did not tell anyone. He tried it once, quietly, with a neighbor woman who had been sleeping badly for 3 months and who everyone said was stressed, and who the doctor had given tablets that were not helping. And he sat near her when she did not know he was doing anything. And he reached, not physically, he was sitting 3 feet away from her. He reached in the way he had taught himself to reach, to the thread that had been cut. And he did not reattach it because he did not have that power. But he ran his attention along the cut end, the way you run your finger along a frayed piece of cloth. And what was there in the cut end was a shape, a memory, an old grief that had been stuffed into the cut instead of processed out, blocking the thread from healing. He could not remove it, but he saw it clearly. And without meaning to, without doing anything deliberate, the seeing of it seemed to do something. The neighbor woman slept properly that night for the first time in months. She told his mother it was the new tablet starting to work. Koko said nothing and wrote it down in notebook 11. By the time he was 14, he had filled 17 notebooks. By the time he was 16, he had stopped keeping notebooks because the understanding had moved out of the books and into him, the way understanding eventually does when you study something long enough. It becomes part of your structure rather than a list of things you have memorized. He was 17 when the second truly impossible thing happened, and this time he was not the only one to see it. He was at school, in the middle of an economics class that he was not fully attending because the teacher's silver threads were in such a state of complicated distress that it was very difficult to concentrate on supply and demand when every single person in the room looked up at the same moment, not because they heard anything, not because anything visible happened. They looked up the way birds take off from a wire simultaneously, acting on information that travels between them in ways science has not yet fully explained. They all looked up, all 32 students and the teacher, and what they saw through the window, through the regular, everyday louvered glass windows of a secondary school classroom in Abeokuta, was the sky coming apart. Not dramatically. This is the thing about impossible things when they actually happen, rather than in the way they happen in films. They are not dramatic. They are simply wrong. The sky did not split with fire or crack with lightning. It came apart the way a seam comes apart when the thread holding it is finally exhausted, quietly, along a line, revealing that what you thought was a single solid thing was actually 2 things that had been held together, and that behind the held together thing was something that had been waiting there the whole time. Through the gap in the sky, nothing that anyone had words for. A color that was not a color, a depth that the eye registered and the mind refused to process, a sense of scale so immense that standing at the window looking at it made every person in the room feel the precise,
disorienting smallness of being one person, in one body, in one room, in one country, in one world. It lasted 23 seconds. Then the sky came back together, the seam healed, and it was a regular Tuesday afternoon. The room was silent for a long time. Then Koko's classmate Wale, who was a very practical person and deeply committed to being unimpressed by things because being impressed felt dangerous to him, said, "Nobody saw that." And everyone agreed. By the time school was dismissed, everyone had agreed. By the time they got home, everyone had constructed to their own satisfaction an explanation involving a cloud formation or a reflection or something they had read about in a science article. The human mind is remarkably determined in its protection of the agreements it has made about what is possible and will work very hard at the seam of an experience to stitch it back closed. Except Koko. Koko had seen it before. Not exactly that, not the sky, but the quality of it, the reality seam, the behind the held together. He had been seeing versions of it since he was 6 years old, since the road bent and the door appeared, since the world started showing him the parts of himself that it usually kept tucked in. What was new was that everyone else had seen it too, and that interested him very much. He went home and thought about it for 3 days. He thought about what it meant that the veil or the agreement or whatever you wanted to call the thing that separated visible reality from all the rest of it had become thin enough for everyone to see through it simultaneously, not just the boy who had been born in the second sunset with a hole in him where a piece of his soul had been borrowed. He thought about whether this was something that had always happened periodically and he had simply never had enough context to know it, or whether it was something new. He thought about what came next. What came next, he understood, was what something that could be written in a notebook. He was 17 years old, in good trousers that his mother had ironed, with jollof rice in his belly, and a heart full of silver threads connecting him to everyone he loved, standing at the window of his room in Abeokuta, where the sky had briefly shown everyone its other face. And he understood with the clarity of someone who has been slowly giving back something that was stolen from them before they were born, assembled over years into a person capable of carrying it, that the world was not breaking, it was opening. It had always been opening. The opening was the point. And he, Koko, born on a Tuesday that refused to end, born with wide open eyes before his body arrived, born carrying the capacity to see the whole thing, whether he wanted to or not, had been built for exactly this. Not to be important, not to be special in the way that makes people put you on a platform and watch you. Built to be the person who, when the sky came apart and everyone looked up and then quickly looked away, would look at the people who looked away and say, "It is all right. I have seen what is behind it. I can tell you what it is. You do not need to close your eyes." Outside, the neighborhood was the neighborhood it had always been. The motorcycles went past, which he still did not like. Someone was frying plantain 2 houses down, and the smell of it was extremely good. His mother was calling him for dinner. He turned away from the window. He went downstairs. He ate his dinner. He told his mother about school and made his father laugh with his story about the economics teacher, and competed for his cousin for the last piece of meat in the pot and lost, which was the usual outcome. And somewhere underneath the visible world, in the other floor of the building, the things going about their business looked up through their ceiling at the warm lit kitchen and at the boy eating his dinner. And if they had had faces that human eyes could read, what was on those faces might have been recognized as something very close to relief. He was here. He had made it. The long Tuesday was over, and whatever was coming, and something was coming, the seam in the sky had said so clearly, something that would make all the small impossible things of his childhood look like practice. Koko was ready. He had always been ready. He was just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up.
That's the end of the story. Please help me like and subscribe. Thank you.